The anthropic principle is a very interesting phenomenon in science. It is described as a scientific principle rather than being a scientific theory, and what this means is that this is more of a way of looking at things in science and making predictions and deductions, rather than making it a theory where you have to test it and see what is actually true. So the anthropic principle is more of a concept that is used in order to make discoveries in the scientific process. Now, it has been described that what could be called the weak anthropic principle is a truism, which would imply that it is a little bit redundant and not always, and maybe too obvious, you could say. But the weak principle is nonetheless still very interesting to think about, because it literally means that we live in the universe in such a way that human life, or life in general, could arise, and because it has arisen, we are able to observe the constants and the rules that underpin our existence in the universe. So for instance, if there is too much of an expanding universe, then stars would not be able to form, and that would be a problem for life. And so this is a good example with thinking about constants, mathematical constants, which put constraints on what is actually possible, specifically for life to evolve. So the idea is that life is actually very rare, or at least potentially very rare, and that is because it has to follow certain constants in order to exist. Now, I might be extrapolating a little bit on the idea of the rarity of human life, but it does seem that humans can't exist, obviously, in most conditions of the universe. And so what that means is we cannot exist in those contexts, in those conditions. Now, one way of looking at the anthropic principle that I find very fascinating, as I am very fascinated with notions of the multiverse, for instance, is that there might actually be multiple universes playing out, and our universe just happened to be a universe that can support life. Now, if the idea of the anthropic principle is that it is amazing that we are able to observe our own universe and to observe the constants that allow us to exist in the first place, it certainly does bring up very interesting and important notions of meaning and of how we are even here. And when I think about it, the fact that I can observe the spaces around me, the fact that I can observe my own mind, that I can observe even mathematics, as difficult as mathematics may be, it is very interesting to think that I nonetheless am able to observe these things in the universe, and that life was able to arise at all. As I said, I don't want to be too critical of whether or not life is rare, but it does seem to me that the conditions have to be a specific way in order for us to exist. And that seems very fascinating, because that to me seems as though we are in a very, I would describe, privileged position where we are able to study the things around us and to understand the world. And to me, the anthropic principle allows for notions of curiosity and for the beauty of our own abilities of deduction and gathering empirical evidence and being able to look at the universe in this way. Now, the reason why I find the idea of the multiverse, of there being different iterations of our universe, and one of which was able to spawn life, fascinates me, not just because it is a multiverse idea, but also because it seems that the things that we imagine in our kind of, you could describe, rigid thinking, can literally be blown open by what is actually possible. And so it is interesting that even though it is not Occam's razor, we're able to imagine that the multiverse exists, and that because it exists, we are able to exist ourselves. And again, this seems to be a very privileged position, to be able to imagine ourselves in such a wide scope of reality, and yet to exist in that realm. Because it is really fascinating to think that if anything was different, we wouldn't be here at all. we wouldn't be able to observe the universe. And the reason why I talk about privileged positions is because one of the ideas that came out of the history of science is the Copernican viewpoint, which is the idea that because humans are very small in the universe, it is very strange to think about how it is easy to think that there is very little meaning or purpose to such an idea. But this does not seem to be the case, because the Anthropic Principle challenges the view that humans don't have any degree of specialness at all. The fact that life has evolved the way that it has is really remarkable. And to me, whether or not we could argue that it's an accident or not, it still allows us to have potential. It is such a remarkable thing to think that we have potential to be able to do remarkable things by way of our intellect and discoveries, and that we definitely shouldn't take that idea for granted. When I think of the Anthropic Principle as being a way in which I think about the world and my place in the universe, I think more and more about how I want to be able to observe things in the universe. I want to know more about existence itself. And that is only something that you can do if the conditions are right. And because those conditions are right, we are able to do that. So I would say, definitely tap into that potential. Definitely tap into the space of you able to look at things in a new and novel way. Strictly because if things were different, you wouldn't exist at all. And even though I think about these things through the context of the scientific lens, which I think is important for understanding the reality in which we experience on a physical level, it is still interesting to think that we still exist and that there are things that we can do, and that philosophically there is much that we can explore. And so the Anthropic Principle could be an argument for saying that we still have a long way to go, and that we still have potential, and that we may be small in the universe, but we are not so small as to be able to be human and to deduce laws and to deduce explanations for our own reality and to be able to collect evidence and empirical data and to be able to see what is really going on. And I think that is fascinating. I think it is important that we don't minimize the specialness of human beings existing. The idea that we do exist with our own human element, and that we are nonetheless, through the Anthropic Principle as an example, and through science and philosophy and explorations, we are able to understand more about our actual universe and the place that we inhabit. I hope that you enjoyed this discussion. This is part of a new series that I have started called Phoenix Discovers the Universe, and I hope that you liked this episode. And I hope to be posting more in this series. I wanted to explore science and the implications of scientific discoveries, and to look at them through a macro lens of a new understanding. And so I'm very excited that I was able to do that today. So keep a lookout. I will have many more videos to come. So definitely keep a lookout. I'm Phoenix, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.